But if you consider the Nioh 1 DLC, it added whole new regions with whole new characters, stories, cutscenes, new enemies. Those enemies were retroactively added to the base game, as well as new weapons that were retroactively added to the base game. And that's fantastic. That's kind of almost unprecedented. I mean, new weapons do show up in DLC for games, certainly, but these were whole new categories of weapons. So technically, it was hundreds of new weapons, as well as new difficulty modes, all sorts of things. So the DLC for the first game really, I think a lot of people might have been spoiled by that. And so whenever they saw the changes that came in Nioh 2, they're like, oh, it's the sort of changes we saw in a DLC. I don't know why anyone was expecting a drastically different game. Um, that was foolish of them if they thought so, especially considering, again, 3 years development difference, and that's not even 3 years development. It's much less than that, all things considered. But the time from Nioh 1 to Nioh 2 is about 3 years, release date wise. So, even if they got the floor running immediately the second Nioh 1 shipped, yeah, that's a big thing. Another thing to consider is Nioh 1 was largely successful. It's probably one of the most successful Koei Tecmo games, certainly of the current era that they're in. And so, yeah, of course they're not going to want to make Nioh 2 too different from the first. They don't want to alienate fans of the first. So, yeah, you're going to want to make a game that's pretty similar. And gameplay-wise, this is very similar. I don't think anybody's saying that. I think there are quite a few reasons, and I'm going to go through them, for why this game is a proper sequel, and why calling it Nioh 1.5 is rather short-sighted and just wrong. So the first of which is a little bit of what I'm going through here, not just to flex on oh man, look how few deaths I have to certain enemies and bosses, but also just to show off a lot of the enemy design that's been changed for old enemies as well as new enemy design too. And one thing that I can't really show off here that hopefully will be apparent in playing the game is that the animations for enemies, yokai and humans alike, are just drastically improved. And this makes a huge difference in how you play the game and how you fight the enemies. So, it's a lot clearer what enemies are going to do, what their attacks are, and just everything, all the animations are just much higher quality. And if you don't believe me, I challenge you to go boot up Nioh 1, guard a bunch, fight a bunch of these same enemies, like Namahage, or, well, really the ones that were in base Nioh 1, I challenge you to go fight. So go fight some basic soldiers or Yoki, and kind of see the way in which they animate and the ways in which they fight you, and then compare them to the enemies that you fight in this game and the ways in that they fight you. And really pay attention to those animations, because they're a lot better in this game. They just are. And the boss animations especially. Speaking of bosses, the bosses in this game are just, by and far much better. Nioh 1 had some good bosses, I'm not going to lie. I liked a lot of them. But a majority of their yokai bosses just kind of sucked. It was a letdown. And so the Nioh 2 bosses, especially the yokai bosses, which is the focus of Nioh 2, have just been fantastic. Here's the Onryoki of Nioh 2. Stop calling Mizuki the Onryoki of Nioh 2. Anyway, what I mean by this, though, is that I think all of the yokai bosses are very distinct in this game. They're very memorable for me, and I really enjoyed fighting pretty much all of them. Even this jerk, whenever he took flight in the air. I think that they just pretty hugely improved upon the yokai designs and the boss designs. I mean, from front to back. I mean, just seriously. They're just massively better. And I think it's a testament to them really doing their all to kind of design these yokai. I really like the ways in which the spirit stones are worked into a lot of the designs. I say that as I pull up the boss I like the least in the game, with the what maybe I consider to be one of the worst designs. But hey, they can't all be winners. But yeah, I think, speaking of, back to Kodami here, speaking of just a little design thing, one that I forgot to point out with Aberrant Soldier, just talking about how much I love the way that these designs look. This one especially, the way that his his Oni horn kind of comes out of his helmet and becomes a part of the crest of his helmet. Just so much little like things like that. And a lot of these designs do tell you a lot about, you know, a lot about the enemy that you're going to be fighting. So, enemy designs and enemy animations are better. Sure, that's great. Over the board, there's a lot more enemies. Enemy variety was a huge complaint people had about the first game. So, if all that's fixed, why are people calling this Nioh 1.5? Obviously, the map's a little bit different, but functionally pretty much the same. There's a lot of similar things. Well, we'll get into a little bit more of what's different and what makes this, again, like I said, Nioh 2. Hopefully these cutscenes will play. I've had them set to where I don't have to manually skip them, but you might notice something in this cutscene that I'll point out a little bit after it plays. There's a couple of things that are important, I think, to notice in this cutscene. So just pay attention, really, is what I ask you to do. I don't just mean, the cute setting and the Kodama. Huh, it didn't make me into Mumyo for this. Interesting. So yeah, a couple of things. Not just how dynamic that cutscene is. Back to being Mumyo over here instead of the weird old man that I normally am. But just the ways in which, like, already there's entirely new voice cast for this game, and this voice cast in this game, at least in Japanese, is fantastic. Really, really great. I think they just do a really good job with their delivery. They bring across the characters really well. I really don't have much complaints. I'm a little bit over level for this, by the way. I'm capped my character at 61 for co-op with a friend, so you're gonna see me trounce this level. I was doing a harder level recording this earlier, and I found that I had to focus a little bit too much on actually engaging in the game, even despite my time played, which I suppose I should pull that up too to kind of illustrate another point or two. If, showing you that all my boss defeats isn't enough to give credibility to what I'm saying here. So, yeah, what you'll hear, and this is a thing that people will say a lot too, right? They'll say, oh, I've beaten New Game Plus, and I have an in-game build, and this is Nioh 1.5. I know what I'm talking about. I don't think you do. I have 210 hours, and that's just on this one character. I do have other characters. I'd say I have probably 250 hours, like, actual game played between all my characters. There's certainly a little bit of time where I left to go and use the bathroom, or, let the game running for one reason or another. But as far as time played, that's, there you go. Watch me still lose to this Tengu, even with that in mind. People, I think, that lose to Tengu just aren't paying attention. And speaking of not paying attention, that's exactly the issue I think people have, is that they're not paying attention. They're just kind of going through the game and playing it like Nioh 1. For instance, they choose the weapons they know that they're good with, that they like, and they don't really pay attention to the significance of new mechanics. here's one right here, the Dark Realm, right? So the Dark Realm adds a pretty significant design change, and that you can design now sections of the map that can be difficult, and then once the player beats them, you know, they're beaten permanently while you're on the map. This lets you do things like have enemies before a boss, and then once you defeat the enemies tied to that Dark Realm, the boss run-up is completely enemy-free. Instead of, you know, having to kind of design a checkpoint right before the boss, now they can kind of make checkpoint, fight, boss, and then, you know, the fight's no longer there after you beat it. Just a lot of little things like that. And I think it's the little things that, you know, culminate. Speaking of little things, I'll talk a little bit about UI changes and quality of life changes here since I hit a shrine. There's a lot of quality of life changes I think people don't realize because they're so woven in and because people probably aren't looking. One big thing is Kodama Bazaar. You can buy up to your stock of elixirs and ammo, which is nice. Not featured here, though, at the bottom right. If I had beaten a Revenant, you can also spend your Divine Rice to buy equipment that Revenant had. People talk about Revenant trading all the time. I'm in a Discord for it, and yet I never see anybody say, hey, go check the Bazaar to make sure you buy the other items that didn't drop. So, you know, that's a big one. Another one is, speaking of Kodama, at the bottom right there, you can see how many Kodama I've actually found in this stage. So, another thing that I constantly watch on streams is people don't realize how many Kodama they've gotten. They go, oh man, I don't know how many I'm missing, and then they just, you know, I guess stress about it. I'm not going to get them to help me, by the way. I'm just going to proceed to this. I'm pretty over-leveled. Yeah, okay. Force me to pay attention to you. But yeah, let's talk about, besides, obviously, he flattened me like a pancake. Gonna be playing this a bit carelessly, by the way, because I'm focused more on talking about points, so please excuse imperfect play. If I wanted to make a gameplay video to show that off, I would. This is more of a for fun kind of build that I have right now, and this is a video more to talk about the game. So, you know, keep that in mind. But yeah, so let's talk about, you know, besides animations, which you'll see throughout this entire stage, other things that are kind of different. So you have the whole yokai ability thing, which I won't harp on too much, except that, you know, I wrote the guide on Soul Course. If anyone knows what they're talking about when it comes to them, it's pretty much me. Come on, don't you mana me. Anyway, Soul Cores are fantastic. They let you animation cancel some of your bigger moves. They let you have situational approaches to a lot of things. And I think a lot of people that complain about this not being, you know, too significant of a sequel aren't considering that change in design of giving you the yokai burst, which is also an animation cancel. For instance, I can be in the middle of doing this and go, oh, I need to get away, right? Which completely can change the way that you're approaching the game, but also all the soul cores. I'll pull it up later to show you that, yes, indeed, I do have all the soul cores in the game at maximum level, because I actually care to engage with the game's mechanics whenever they're new. But there are some people that I watch, they don't use soul cores. They don't burst as an animation cancel. They don't ever use burst. You know, I watch streams and I never see people actually use burst outside of using it for solely a, you know, solely to do the actual counter. They just think of it as using a counter mechanic. In fact, I don't know, whenever the game came out, or at least the demos were coming out, people were criticizing it, saying, it's basically like Mikiri counter, you know, that's all the mechanic is, and that's from Sekiro, by the by. And I disagree entirely. Mikiri counter didn't let you animation cancel your moves. Mikiri counter didn't have functionality outside of, you know, or I say Mikiri counter, the counter system and Sekiro didn't have functionality like the burst system does. So it's fantastic. It's like significantly changes the game. People that complain probably not using it. And I don't think the game is hard enough that it really requires you to. And maybe that's a problem. But I don't really see it as one. I think that if you actually want to be good at the game, and you want to get the most out of the game, you should use all of its systems. Oh, you little butt. Sorry, talking-ish on these aberrant soldiers. But, yeah, so soul cores. A lot of people, I think, don't, you know... Oop, that was real improper use. I should have done it head-on. I was just trying to look to get a horn break right there. Which Roku B can be great if you are ending a fight with it or getting a horn break with it, but otherwise, you know, it's pretty situational. But I like it. I like it whenever I'm fighting an invasive enemy because it's a 360 attack. And that's what I'm talking about, is that soul cores have a pretty significant kind of effect on the game, and I see people not using them at all. I see people neglecting to use them whenever they really should be, especially under stressful situations. I never see, I want to talk about something I never see people do. Never see people pull this one where they actually use their other spirit to give themselves situational abilities. So as you may have noticed there, my other spirit is... It's set up with each of the elemental Oni-B. So that I can give myself these buffs without having to actually have the talisman or use the talisman. And you will see that buff still last, as long as the talisman buff does. Alright. So yeah, just a lot of features that I think people are underutilizing, those new ones being huge kind of elements of it. Enemy design. One thing that I was kind of hoping to show through playing this stage, although I kind of have gone past some of the segments, I'll show a little bit more. I think the stage design is way better. The stages are not just way more attractive and interesting visually, but the way in which enemies are laid out throughout the stage, the way in which the stages tell their stories, I think that's way more captivating. I especially love, like, going through that kind of initial sort of overrun village and coming out here and you see all these trees that are clawed, and you can see quite a few of these even earlier in the stage. It really lets you know, especially like when you get to this moment, like, oh damn, you know, the thing that I'm fighting probably has some sort of claws, you know, and it's carving up even these trees, right? And you didn't really get that many moments like that in Nioh 1, where the stage really told you a story. You got shortcuts, certainly, and little things like that in Nioh 1, but the stages were fairly short and fairly linear, which is no knock on them, but I like the more complex stages. I like the verticality a lot of these stages have, which might not be shown off necessarily here at this moment, although, you know, I can take pot shots at this guy, waste a couple of pieces of ammo. But a lot of the stages in Nioh 2 have a lot more verticality than they do in the first game. Well, that's interesting. Anyway, I was like, oh, this is where I came out. The way in which the stages are built, again, it's smarter. It's I would say better. It makes you more critically kind of engage with the stage and spend a little bit more time in it. Again, Dark Realm is a part of that stage design, and a pretty great part of it, in my opinion. So if the stages are different and better, and the enemy variety and placement and animations are different and better, then, you know, what else? Well, I've had the sound turned down, and this isn't really a great stage to show it, but in general, the soundtrack to this game is phenomenal. I like the soundtrack in the first game, but it could be quite subdued. However, there are a lot of moments that stick out to me in the audio of this game, especially in huge like really important stages like Cherry Blossom Viewing, or whenever you go to the Sohaya village. That moment really sticks out. The way in which the music arcs up whenever you're fighting the actual bosses, though here it's a bit of a joke. You got that for all of the one swell for me to beat up that Inky in a single hit or two, but in actual play, those moments are really great. And I love the way in which whenever bosses Dark Realm, the theme changes. There's just a lot of just great sound design and musical moments, and a lot of that's from Nioh 1. Nioh 1 even had, like, whenever the enemy notices you, there's a distinct sting, a little sound cue that you get. Here's what I'm talking about verticality, though. This whole time I've been trying to avoid falling in water, avoiding that and all of that, but now I can look down and, hey, there's an entire, subsection of the stage that was underneath me the entire time, and I can go and explore that if I want to. I've done that before, I don't. But, I think that sort of thing, that verticality, the way in which the stages kind of tell themselves this story, or tell you this story, the way the music is incorporated, and especially cues in certain parts of different themes or different parts of the stage. All of that's just a masterclass and what really elevates Nioh 2. So, we get about a good 60 stages in this game that aren't duels and that are entirely new stages. There's a few stages from the first game that are reused, but again, the context of the stages is entirely different. You're put into like just a little part of those Nioh 1 stages, and nothing's nearly egregious as, the weathered fields that you had to deal with in Nioh 1. So all in all, Nioh 2 has much better stages. Another big thing, and I mentioned paying attention to that earlier cutscene, it wasn't just for the voice acting and the expressiveness of the cutscene and the characters and how the camera was used, but one thing that you might get a little bit more of here is the way in which your player character is actually involved in the cutscene. So I'll start this up, but I don't think any other action RPG quite uses your player character and involves them in the same way this game does in its story, which, by the way, entirely new story, very well told. I'd say superior to the first game's story. So yeah, here, I love the way in which it builds the relationship between you and Tokichiro. Speaking of, character expressiveness, a lot of people are really married to their characters in this game, figuratively, I mean. They really like their custom characters, and I think a lot of that has to do with the way in which your character gestures, emotes, and is a large part of the cutscenes. Here I've kind of covered myself with a Tengu mask, but, we're going to be playing a character, and I'd suggest making a more serious character that you can actually engage with when you play, not just making kind of a joke-looking character. I think that'll help you kind of engage with the plot. Oh man, there's so much that goes into like the design for boss fights that you're not really gonna get to see here. Yeah, there's that shift in the theme there that I mentioned. And that's gonna be Kamitachi for us, but yeah, so, if it's the sort of thing where this game has entirely new, stages that are better, has better enemy variety and design as well as animations across the board. It has better bosses and boss design and animations across the board. It adds a huge slew of new equipment and armor and ways in which you can actually temper that and mess with that in New Game Plus. That differentiate it from the first game in a couple of pretty critical ways. That's all really interesting and builds on the first system while still keeping all the sets and equipment from the first system. Whole new cast, whole new voice actor, whole new soundtrack, whole new story. Why do people call this game Nioh 1.5? What's the deal? I'll tell you what it is, what my pet theory is, and really what it comes down to. I think those people played the first Nioh, probably played a good bit of the first Nioh. In fact, a lot of the people I hear this complaint from are the ones that have a lot of time invested in the first Nioh, and we're looking forward to this game. I think those people aren't considering the context that I mentioned of the game. But I think those people also played this game and they didn't engage with what was new about this game. They didn't pay that much attention to the significant difference in animations. They just kind of fought their way through. They didn't have to kind of struggle or overcome or engage with a lot of the mechanics because they already had 100 plus hours and knew the core systems so well that they could just pick up their favorite weapon, fight through the game, beat it on New Game Plus, and not really have to consider the more nuanced things, not really have to pay attention to the stages that they were struggling through, not really have to see, I guess they weren't seeing the forest for the trees, however that phrase goes. So they were essentially playing Nioh 2 as if it were a DLC of Nioh 1, and that's why they believe it is. The same people that make this argument will often be the people that say that Yokai Shift is a useless mechanic. They're the same people that will largely ignore soul cores. They're people that likely did not use hatchets or switchglaive as a weapon and actually, pay attention to those. And they're ultimately people that I think aren't paying attention to a lot in the game. And so for those people, if you're one of the people that thinks that Nioh 2 is essentially Nioh 1.5 and just copies a lot of things, I'm going to challenge you to actually play through the game, make a new character, play through the game with a weapon that you've never used, limit yourself to never being a higher level than the recommended level. And in fact, if you're good at the game, never try to be more than half the recommended level for a stage. Really challenge yourself. Make yourself really have to grapple with and engage with the mechanics of the game. Force yourself to use spirits and soul cores you normally wouldn't use. Change it every stage if you have to. Really pay attention this time. Turn up the audio. Use headphones. Watch all the cutscenes again. Look, and you'll see that this isn't Nioh 1.5. It's Nioh 2. It's right there on the cover of the game. And for those of you who haven't played Nioh 2 and were maybe put off by picking it up because you heard it was just Nioh 1.5, I can assure you that this is not just a better game, it's probably one of the best action RPGs that's ever come out. And you should certainly play it, especially if you like Nioh 1. But even if you haven't played Nioh 1, because this is a prequel, it's a great game to start with and does a fantastic job of involving the player. I can't suggest it enough. Play Nioh 2, enjoy Nioh 2, and understand it's not Nioh 1.5. Maybe you can stop being so angry, and after a little bit of consideration, calm down and realize Nioh 2 is just a fantastic game, and it's certainly a sequel. Considering that it only came out 3 years after the first, it's amazing what Koei Tecmo was able to produce. And I look forward to, the DLC that they've already announced for this game, which promises to be fantastic, especially considering that they're looking at the same scope that they had the DLC for the first game. So, without any doubts, I want you to go back if you haven't, and if you have, not ever bought the game, or if you, even if you own it and you consider it Nioh 1.5, I want you to go back and I want you to either go for the first time, either if it's your first time playing or otherwise, but I want you to actually enjoy Nioh 2. Spend time with it. You'll realize it's not just a rehash of everything from Nioh 1. There's a lot more here than you expect. It's almost like they built a whole new game overnight. Okay, that's me maybe trying to stretch the metaphors for what's happening in these cutscenes, a little bit. But, no, you know what I mean. Go enjoy it. It's a good time.